Hi, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. Are you looking for a beach read this summer? May I suggest your big wireless bill? It's got suspense, mystery, a slightly flat emotional arc, and a shocking twist where you realize you've been overpaying the entire time. Fortunately, though, Mint's story is better. Every plan, $15 a month, even unlimited. That's it. Happy ending, zero tears. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. See terms.
This is the Station for Negotiation podcast, episode number 63. My name is Gene Killian. I've been a lawyer and professional negotiator for 40 years. A man walks into the office of a struggling company. On paper, it looks like the company has about 6 weeks to live. He's wearing the yuppie uniform. He's got a blue blazer and some pleated khakis. He's a former private equity guy, and he spent some time teaching high school. He has never run a retail store in his life, let alone a retail clothing store. And the company he's just been handed has gone bankrupt twice. It's a clothing store chain that the entire business world has essentially written off. And the financial reports are pretty grim. They send a pretty clear message. Liquidate. Sell off whatever you have left, fire the employees, turn out the lights. But this man, whose background is in numbers, decides to do something pretty strange. He doesn't accept what the numbers on the sheet are telling him. He says, I want to find the true story about this company and see if there's any value hidden here before I sink the entire ship. So he goes out into the field. He talks to customers. He talks to employees. He takes a look at the inventory they have. He goes looking for what numbers can't see. And what he finds as a result of this quest ends up saving the company and saving about 1,000 jobs. And there's also a toy involved in this story. It's a small red plastic helicopter. Hold on to that thought because I'm going to come back to it. Today, I want to take a look at the story of Ashley Stewart, the clothing company, James Rhee, R-H-E-E is how you spell his last name, who's the man who found himself in charge of this company through an accident of circumstance. And I want to take a look at 3 negotiation lessons that are hiding inside the story of this rebirth of this clothing company. And I'm going to draw heavily on a book by James Rhee called Red Helicopter, Lead Change with Kindness Plus a Little Math. This is a wonderful book. It's part memoir and it's part business strategy book. And I really think it should be required reading for anyone involved in business and also for anyone involved in negotiation. So let me set the stage properly because the background is the foundation for the negotiation lessons I want us to take a look at. Ashley Stewart, this clothing chain, was founded in 1991. It was built for, targeted at, and loved by plus-size Black women, specifically working class and moderate income women. And over the years, it became something more than a clothing chain. Its stores really started to function as community institutions. People would go there to hang out. Customers called the store managers Miss Ashley. And grandmothers and mothers and daughters shopped there together for the clothes you wear to work, to church, or on a date night. But by 2013, the company was involved in its second bankruptcy, and into that mess stepped James Rhee. Rhee was the least obvious person for this job. He's a first-generation American brought here by his Korean parents when he was a little boy. Although he's a Harvard Law School graduate, he never practiced law. And as I said, he was a one-time private equity investor with zero experience operating anything, let alone a retail clothing store. He'd also been a high school teacher for a while. And he'd been a board member, a passive board member of this company. So when the company hit the edge of the cliff, through an accident of circumstance, he finds himself at the head of this company, which largely is involved in the inner cities and which has a demographic of mostly black women as its customers. So you have this Korean guy from Harvard Law School, never having practiced law, suddenly he's at the head of this company that has a specific market niche. And here's the central tension of this whole story. The financials, the financial reports, the income statements and the balance sheets, and the reality on the ground were telling James Rhee two completely different stories. If you looked at the spreadsheet, this company was dead. But the people who actually worked there and who shopped there were telling a different story. So the question James Rhee had to answer is the same question you face at a negotiation table often. Which story do you believe? And how do you find out what's really true? So the first thing I want to talk to you about, and he doesn't use this terminology in the book, this is my terminology, is the concept of negotiation by walking around. A few years back, there was this theory of management. People called it a new theory, but it seems like a common sense theory to me, called management by walking around. And what it meant was you can't really understand what's going on inside your company unless you get away from your desk, you get out of your office or cubicle, you get away from your computer screen, you get away from your spreadsheets, and you just walk around and talk to people. What's going on? What problems do you face? What are we doing well? You have any suggestions? Just engage them in conversation and you'll be amazed at what you find. And so that was the concept of management by walking around. And here, James Rhee, I think, uses what I'll call the concept of negotiation by walking around. You know, there's an old saying by the famous football coach Bill Parcells, you are what your numbers say you are. You are what your numbers say you are. And that's true to an extent, because sometimes people try to make excuses for their poor performance. But you're not always what your numbers say you are. There's always the question of potential. Is there hidden value behind the operations of this company? If you're negotiating to buy a company, if you're negotiating to become part of a company, is there a way you can show hidden value? And so that's what James Rhee had on his mind. The first thing he did was, let me get out of this building and go talk to people. He went out into the field, into the actual stores, and he talked to the people running the stores. He listened to customers. And what he found out was the thing that financial statements had no column for. There was an intensely loyal community with respect to these Ashley Stewart stores. People didn't shop there the way they shopped at a generic store in a mall. They felt like they belonged to Ashley Stewart, and that was the real asset. Not the inventory, not the property, these relationships that could be built upon. And here's where it turns into negotiation, because James Rhee has to negotiate with his key employees to stay, and he has to negotiate with his vendors to get better terms to give the company a little breathing room. So he takes his ground level intelligence and he uses it as leverage. He uses it to decide who stays and who goes. He keeps the people who share the vision, and he parts ways with the ones who don't. He uses this information at the bargaining table with vendors. Because once you understand what a company actually is, you can negotiate from an entirely different footing than someone reading a grim spreadsheet or just numbers. So I want to draw that lesson out because it's easy to mistake this for me saying, just go talk to people. It's nice. That's not the point. The point is about gathering information. And the thing to remember is that in any negotiation, the party with the most data is not necessarily the best informed party. The best informed party is the one who knows which data is really true and which data is really important, which numbers are real, which are just noise, and which might be quietly lying to you. And the only way you can get that knowledge is by getting out from behind your desk and getting into the field, onto the floor. Those kinds of conversations might not make it into a spreadsheet, but they can help you identify hidden value. So I want to go to the book for a moment. And let's take a look at James Rhee talking about some of the conversations he had when he first got to the firm with Ashley Stewart employees. Listen carefully to what he says. He says, quote, "The conversations reminded me of the ones I had had with my mother over the years. I did a whole lot of listening with my ears and my eyes, not just with the people who oversaw key functions, but with everyone. One by one, my new colleagues took a seat at the oval table. Some were curious or had ideas they had swallowed for fear of being dismissed or ridiculed. I didn't turn anyone away. Meetings happened organically. I noted who had the courage to grab a seat, and I gave them that space. Generally speaking, it was the people who had something on their minds, something that was bothering them, something they wanted, they needed to get off their chests. People who cared. What's your name? What do you do? Why do you think I'm here? Why are you here? Why are you still here? What kind of music do you listen to? What do you do for fun? While listening to those answers, I gained insights into a few other implicit questions. I felt like my dad, who always used Socratic methodology. What are you good at? Do you truly care about the outcome? How willing are you to learn new things? How willing are you to unlearn other things? Do you have a history of overcoming obstacles? Are you willing to suspend disbelief and keep an open mind? Are you willing to embrace contradictions? And fundamentally, are you willing to take this leap with me? That said, I made my share of declarative statements in a voice whose timbre and pitch were distinctive from my everyday one. Against the backdrop of a disarmingly casual environment more typical of a kitchen than a boardroom, the statements had an unmistakable gravity and clarity. This is a new system, I said, a clean slate, with a different intent. Your reaction is your choice, not mine. Unhappy people usually end up firing themselves, I added. I would give those people the time and space to do just that. Close quote. So that is the story, part of the story of how he goes out and starts just talking to people to find out what's going on. And he carries these conversations into the local stores. He goes to them and he talks to the people running them, and he just gets as much information as he can to identify where the strengths and weaknesses are. So the thing to remember here is negotiation by walking around. Spreadsheets may be part of a negotiation, but they don't decide the negotiation. The best informed party at the table is not the one with the most data. It's the one who knows which data is true. Go find the facts that the spreadsheets can't see, because remember, often negotiation is decided in favor of the person who has the highest quality information and who understands it. Let me give you a story from my own career. When my partner Carl and I started our law firm back in the mid-90s, our first big case involved a massive pollution problem in southern New Jersey. And it stemmed from a factory that used to manufacture bathtubs. And our job was to try to get this company's insurance companies to pay for the cleanup, which they did not want to do. And the insurance companies painted this as just a contract issue. And the contract issue is, if we expected to cause pollution, which we clearly did given the levels of pollution around this factory, then we were not entitled to our insurance coverage because that's what the contracts said. And when you looked at the environmental reports, you thought, maybe they have a point here because the environmental pollution levels were high. But my partner and I said, you know what? Let's go down and talk to people. Let's talk to people in the neighborhood. Let's talk to people who used to work at this company. Let's walk the grounds and take some pictures and see if we can understand how this whole process worked. And when we did that, we ran into people who were the absolute salt of the earth. These were not people who you would think would go out and intentionally pollute anything. They were World War II veterans. They were Korean War veterans. These were people who had worked hard in their community. And they all told us a consistent story. We were making bathtubs with metal, and we were covering them with enamel. And sometimes there would be flaws in the enamel, so we chipped the enamel off and we used it as fill behind the plant. We just thought it was basically sand, like glass particles. And it helped us kind of extend the property a little bit. It helped the company extend the property a little bit. We never thought we were polluting anything. It turns out there were trace elements of lead in this, what was essentially glass chips. And over the years, that lead, unbeknownst to these people, leached out and into the water around the plant. That's how the pollution happened. And that's an entirely different story than uncaring, corporate demons intentionally poisoning the environment around the plant. And once we had that knowledge in hand, it helped us immensely in negotiating settlements with the insurance companies. One insurance company decided they weren't going to settle with us and decided to go to trial against us. And their idea was to portray us as, poisoners of the environment. But when the people we met got up on the witness stand and told their story, told about the plant, told about the operation, told about how they had raised their families around the plant, and if they ever thought there was a pollution problem, they would have tried to stop it because it affected them personally and directly. Well, that insurance company just got hammered at the trial, just hammered. Why did that happen? I don't say this out of any humble bragging or trying to, make us look like we're the brightest bulbs in the world. But the only way we would have been able to present these facts and this story was by getting out into the field, negotiating by walking around. So just remember that. Your most powerful weapon in analyzing your negotiation position is often not your spreadsheet or your income statement. It's what's behind it. It's the people who make up the company. Go talk to them. Your best weapon, your best research device is your telephone. Call people, get the story, find out what's really going on. And that's what James Rhee did here. And eventually, with the information he had, he implemented changes and was able to save the company. Now, here's a second lesson I want to take a look at. And this is sort of a quietly radical concept, especially if you have an accounting background. James Rhee talks about building what he calls an accurate balance sheet and learning to measure the goodwill of a company. And to do that, he had to do something that sounds like heresy to a financial person. He questioned which things were actually assets and which things were actually liabilities. So, for example, take a look at inventory. On an accounting statement, inventory is an asset. It's a thing of value that the company owns. But inventory that doesn't sell well, for example, clothes that nobody wants to buy because they don't like the style, that's not an asset at all. It ties up cash. It ties up space. It absorbs attention. It is a liability dressed up as an asset. And I don't have to tell you this. If you've ever tried to sell a house in a down market, or you bought a used car, you know that things that nominally are assets in the accounting world were actually liabilities to you. And so what he did is he went out in the field, he looked at what they had in inventory, and he decided, with the help of the people he was talking to on the ground, which items were really assets and which items were really liabilities. Think about it. Not only inventory, but everything you look at in terms of the financial picture has a chance of being reclassified. Think about payroll, for example. On an income statement or a financial statement, payroll is a liability, right? It's an expense. It's a cost. It's a number most business people would like to shrink. But if you have the right people doing the right work, building a loyal community of customers or clients the way Ashley Stewart did, then payroll is really an investment in an appreciating asset. It's the engine of the goodwill that the company has. So the numbers on the financial statements weren't entirely accurate. And James Rhee's edge, his advantage, came from refusing to take these numbers at face value. So here's how that translates into negotiation. Every negotiation arrives on your desk with a ledger, right? The other side hands you a frame. This is a valuable thing. This is a concession. This is what it costs. And most negotiators argue inside that frame. They haggle over the items that their opponent has labeled. But the advantage goes to you as a negotiator if you audit the ledger independently. If you ask, is this thing that they're calling an asset really an asset? Is it actually valuable to me? Is this liability over here, is it actually a cost, or is it something I'd happily take? Some of the best deals on earth are made when one side trades away something it has booked as worthless to someone who knows it's worth a fortune. Value is not a fact you inherit. It's an argument you have to develop. So before you bargain over items, re-examine the categories. A liability may be an asset, and something booked as an asset may be bleeding you to death. Value is always an argument. It's not a given. Let me talk about this as James Rhee talks about it in his book in terms of classifying assets and liabilities. And here's part of what he says. He's talking here about the people he's working with, and because they're all sort of on the outside of what would normally be considered the standard business world, he refers to them as the misfits because he views them all as living on an island of misfit toys. So he's talking about assets and liabilities of the company with some of his coworkers, and here's what he writes. One of the misfits had two follow-up questions. I still don't understand. Why in the world did the company's lender give us a few extra dollars and add some additional months for us to pay? And by the way, what does it mean for a lender to be asset-based? It wasn't an act of generosity, I explained. The lender was justifiably looking out for its own best interests. Asset-based lenders are the equivalent of hard money lenders. That is, lenders whose loan is secured by specific identifiable assets. Think of a car loan or a house loan, more commonly known as a mortgage. If you don't honor the terms of the loan, at some point the lenders can seize the car or the house, hire intermediaries to conduct an auction, and turn the asset into cash. Quite literally, liquidation means turning an asset into water or cash, which is the most liquid asset. So by fronting us a few extra dollars, the company's asset-based lender was getting us to March, at which point the going out of business sales would attract more shoppers emerging from winter hibernation. In other words, thanks to the heightened demand from spring shoppers, the value of our inventory would be much higher in March. My voice trailed off as I mumbled, this so-called asset has become our greatest liability. Seeing they didn't quite appreciate the irony, I explained in further detail. To protect themselves, asset-based lenders have rigid appraisal formulas, which is literally called lending inside the box. Built on huge amounts of appraisal data from countless prior transactions spanning decades of going out of business sales, these formulas can accurately predict the cash value of specific assets in liquidation proceedings. The independent purchasing decisions of tens of millions of individuals from the past can be reduced to a single number or percentage. Amazing, right? That means at some point, if you don't honor the terms of your car loan or your mortgage, the asset-based lender is mathematically confident that it can fully recoup its loan by just seizing and selling your car or house, or in our case, our inventory. A lender just wants to get its money back, which means that an asset-based lender is in effect lending to the asset, not the actual person or business in custody of the asset. This also means that in the event of a crisis, if the assets have too much value and the lender can turn them into cash and pay off its loan, the lender has every incentive to liquidate the business rather than keeping it afloat and taking on incremental risk. For the borrower, then, these so-called assets can become, oddly enough, liabilities, or death warrants, to put it more directly. So that's the way he was looking at the business. He was trying to figure out what here is really an asset and what here is really a liability. And that's what you should be doing in every negotiation. Never accept the framing or labeling of your opponent. Dig beneath the surface. Is this item, is this category, is this contract, is this lease, is this really an asset or is it really a liability? Take a hard look at that. The third lesson I'd like to talk to you about from James Rhee's book is the idea that kindness is not niceness. Kindness is at the very center of this book. And it's the one thing that's most likely to be misunderstood, so I want to be precise about it. Niceness is about wanting people to like you too much. It's about avoiding friction and avoiding confrontation. It's about smoothing things over, telling people what they want to hear, dodging the hard conversation so nobody feels bad in the moment. Niceness is, very often, conflict avoidance dressed up as a virtue. And at a negotiating table, if you are nice, you will get eaten alive. It's just the way it is. You can't be in negotiation and want the other person to like you too much. That's not what this is about. But that's different from kindness. Kindness is something else entirely. Kindness is respect. Kindness is clarity. Kindness is honesty delivered straight, even when the message is hard. And James Rhee made, as you'll see when you read this book, made genuinely difficult decisions. He let people go. He pushed hard on terms with vendors and creditors. He restructured the company by making hard decisions in crisis, and none of that is particularly nice. People did get hurt by some of his decisions. But he made the decisions with kindness, with directness, with dignity, and without contempt. So for negotiators, this reframes the concept of empathy. Empathy is not a soft, sentimental thing you bring to the table and hope that it's reciprocated. Empathy is a great quality, but it's also a tactical instrument. When you genuinely take the time to understand the other side's interests, and you treat them like a human being while you do it, you're going to get better information, you're going to build trust that makes deals durable, and you're going to find trades that a hostile or aggressive negotiation would never bring to the surface. And here's the part that most people miss, I think. None of that requires you to give up an inch that you shouldn't give up. Firmness and warmth are not a trade-off. You can be completely impossible to push around and still be the most respected person in the room. That's not a contradiction. That's the whole skill. Harvey Mackay was a great executive, and he wrote a book once in which he said, "Don't be afraid to smile when you say no." What does that mean? It means you don't have to be difficult. You don't have to be abrasive. You can smile and just say, that doesn't work for us. You can be kind while still being direct. So, kindness can win negotiations. Niceness will lose them. If you are worried too much about what the other side thinks, you are going to get eaten alive. The idea is to be impossible to push around and still be the most respected person at the table, a person whom your adversary would like to do business with again in the future. Because let me tell you something. If you allow yourself to be pushed around, people will not respect you. They will think you're weak. They will not want to do business with you in the future unless they can figure out a way to take advantage of you. But if you show empathy, and if you're kind, and if you're still tough at the table, that generates respect. So, if that idea grabs you, which is empathy is leverage, not just sentiment, that's the same territory that George Thompson mapped out for us in verbal judo, which we talked about in a previous episode. And it's also a concept that Chris Voss, the famous negotiation teacher and author, has built a career on. And believe me, we're going to come back to that concept in future episodes. So let's pull these lessons together because they're not three separate things, really. They're basically the foundation of one method. First, get out in the field and learn what's real. Second, re-audit the financial statements. Look behind the numbers so you're valuing things correctly. And then, lastly, negotiate whatever plan you have with firmness and respect. And that is what James Rhee did. He didn't beat the spreadsheet by being softer than the spreadsheet. He beat it by being more honest than the spreadsheet, by seeing assets everyone else had marked down to zero and refusing to look away. Now, at the beginning of this episode, I said there was a red helicopter in the middle of it, a toy helicopter, and of course the book is called Red Helicopter. So what does that mean? When James Rhee was 5 years old in kindergarten, he would bring his lunch to school, and he noticed that one of his friends never had lunch with him. So James Rhee would share his lunch with this boy, and he did it repeatedly. One day, the boy's father showed up, unannounced, and he handed James a small bag with a present. And inside the bag was a toy red helicopter that James loved. He didn't understand why the guy was giving it to him. And he could sense that somehow this guy was both happy and sad. And when he got home, he had a conversation with his parents, and he was very worried that his parents were mad at him for some reason. But they weren't. They were proud of him. And they basically told him, that boy's had a rough time. His family's having some financial difficulties. His father recently lost the boy's mother. And what you did was really a nice thing to do. And that red helicopter that he gave you was a quiet thank you. So we're proud of you. Now that helicopter did what most toys from your childhood do. It got lost. James Rhee lived a life. He went off to Harvard. He went to law school. He went to Wall Street. And he worked. And he forgot about it. Or as he put it, he buried it. Because everything that little toy represented about his immigrant parents and their values, he kind of forgot about. It even seemed a little embarrassing. But the helicopter idea came back to him decades later in his early 40s, when he was at his father's deathbed. And he remembered how important the values embodied by that red helicopter were. And that's why I'm telling you the story about this toy on a negotiation show. James Rhee's whole argument is that things we can't easily measure are often the things that matter most. The loyalty of a customer, the dignity of an employee, even an employee who does wrong, the goodwill that never shows up cleanly on a balance sheet. The spreadsheet would tell you that those things are worthless, but James Rhee knew better. James Rhee says everyone has their own red helicopter story, a moment, an object, some piece of plain childhood wisdom that we learned and then buried under everything we were told really counts. But here's your takeaway. I'm not asking you to throw away math or financial statements. That stuff all matters a lot. But the lesson to keep in mind is the spreadsheet and the numbers, they're just a tool. They're something that you use as part of the whole toolbox. A negotiator who knows the spreadsheets, but then gets out in the territory, asks questions, and treats people well along the way, that negotiator is going to find things and values that everyone else wrote off. That's what James Rhee did. So, what I'd ask you to do is go read the book. And by the way, if you don't have time to go read the book, James Rhee gave an excellent TED Talk about this whole story, and we will put the link for the TED Talk in the show notes. Point is, go out and find your red helicopter. Then go back to the table and look for value that nobody else can see. And folks, that's all I have for you today on the Station for Negotiation. So this is Gene Killian signing off and reminding you once again that negotiation is life. Hey, thanks for listening to the Station for Negotiation podcast. Until next time, you can keep up with us on social media at the following places. On X, formerly known as Twitter, it's at STN4Negotiation. That's at STN4Negotiation. On Facebook, you can hit us up at facebook.com/Station4Negotiation pod. That's facebook.com/Station4Negotiation pod. Over on Instagram, you can reach us at Station4Negotiation. Again, that's at Station4Negotiation. On LinkedIn, Station4Negotiation podcast. Again, that's Station4Negotiation podcast. Over on YouTube, we're at Station4Negotiation. That's at Station4Negotiation. If you want to shoot us an email, you can do that at Station4Negotiationpod@gmail.com. That's Station4Negotiationpod@gmail.com. So we'll see you next time on the Station for Negotiation podcast. And until then, remember, negotiation is life.